Well, welcome everyone. What we're talking about is diet and chronic disease tonight. And just to let you know that the science is catching up with us. You know, we've been talking about this for 30 years here at Parkview before it became Parkview and Midcoast. And there's some really fun things that we can go over. First of all, I thought I'd not talk about diet, but about exercise. How many of you exercise regularly? Oh, that's most hands. Now you're going to start, aren't you? Okay, good. All right. This came out March 28 in Journal of American Medical Association. And they wanted to know what the relationship was between walking and mortality. Because, you know, we don't all get to walk every day as much as we'd like. So they looked at people that walked 1 to 2 days a week, and the threshold for counting at walking was about 8,000 steps. How many miles is that about? Well, 3.5, 4, something like that, depending on the length of your stride. And they found that sure enough, if you walked 3.5, 4 miles a day, your risk of all-cause mortality drops. It drops by about 40%. And if you walk 8,000 steps 3 days a week, it drops further. But surprisingly, not a whole lot further. And if you walk 7 days a week for 8,000 steps, it drops, but not a whole lot further. It's a curvilinear association. If you walk 2 days a week, you get a drop like this, and then it kind of goes like that. So even if you only walk 2 days a week, you're still going to get a lot of benefit from it. You get the biggest drop in risk of all-cause mortality just from walking 2 days a week. And we can all fit that in, right? Even if you work full-time, you've still got the weekend. So take heart, even if you don't walk every day, you still get some improvement in risk reduction. So that's good. All right, so we're going to put that behind us and look at some things about diet. You've probably all heard us talk about salt restriction, right? And you wonder, well, is that important or not? Cheryl talked this evening about how you can cut down the amount of salt that you put in your food. And so this one is from the European Heart Journal, March 31, 2023. What they found is that the more salt people eat, the higher the burden of atherosclerosis in the arteries of the heart and of the head, the arteries going to the head. And usually we say, well, that's because they had high blood pressure, right? No, they found this even in people with normal blood pressure. So there's a direct relationship between the amount of salt you consume and the development of narrowed arteries to your heart and to your head, even if you don't have high blood pressure. You know, I have some people that come in, my blood pressure's fine, so I don't worry about salt. Well, wait a minute. Now we've got good evidence just last month, just a few days ago, that you don't want to eat a lot of salt. And there's some really interesting things they've done with that. If you sit down and have a nice salty meal, within 35 to 40 minutes, your arteries constrict from the sodium. If, however, you sit down and you have a high potassium meal, and that's like what she just put in her pot here, those beans are high in potassium. And if you have a high potassium meal, your arteries dilate. So encourage you to think about that. Even if your blood pressure is normal, you want to avoid, whenever you can, that excess salt. Now, we all need some salt. And the more water you drink, the less restrictive you have to be with the salt because you wash it out of your system. But remember, even if you have normal blood pressure, be careful because all-cause mortality goes up with salt intake because of the deterioration in the arteries. All right, that was from the European Heart Journal. Here's one from the British Journal of Medicine, April 5. We're getting closer to where we live, right? April 5, 2023. This is dietary sugar consumption and health. And they looked at quite a few things. They looked at sugar intake and weight, and they factored that out, and they wanted to get just sugar intake and its relationship to various diseases. And they found a whole lot of different things with sugar intake and what it causes. They found that if you have a higher sugar intake, you have a higher risk of gout. If you have a higher sugar intake, as you'd guess, you have a higher risk of diabetes, a higher risk of obesity in both children and adults. You have a higher risk of fat accumulation in the liver. Now today I saw a patient who went into liver failure from fat in her liver. In fact, fatty liver is the #1 cause of liver failure in our country today. People think, well, a little fatty liver won't hurt you. Well, yes, it will. It raises your risk for cancer of the liver, for one. But it is a very common cause of fatty liver. And we talked today about how to get that fat out of the liver. And it's basically the diet that we teach here. Plant-based, low in sugar. But a high sugar diet will definitely increase your risk of what we call steatohepatitis. That's fatty liver. Another association is coronary artery disease. Just eating a high sugar diet will increase your risk of coronary artery disease. And you know, you thought it was all cholesterol. No, it isn't. There's another study that I didn't quote tonight that I just read showing that in people that take statins, and we all, you know, you take those statin drugs to lower your cholesterol. In people that take statins, there's a closer relationship between your next heart attack and inflammation than there is between cholesterol and your next heart attack. So if you're on a statin, and this is true if you're not too, but even if you're on a statin and your cholesterol looks great, you say, I'm home free. No, because if your inflammatory markers are up, you're still at risk for a heart attack. And what does sugar do? It pushes your inflammatory markers up. And that's one of the reasons why a high sugar diet increases your risk of having a heart attack. We've talked before about sugar and glycation and how glycation impairs circulation, and of course that applies as well. So a high sugar diet increases your risk for a heart attack. It increases your risk for a stroke. And of course, it increases your risk for hypertension that raises your risk of both of those. But it also increases your risk for a number of cancers, including breast cancer. So a high sugar diet is associated with breast cancer. It's associated with hepatocellular carcinoma. That's liver cancer, and that's probably through its effect on fat deposition in the liver. It increases your risk for prostate cancer, gentlemen, so you don't get off easy either. It increases your risk for pancreatic cancer as well, and overall cancer risk as well. That's quite a list just from a high sugar diet. So at the end of the article, one more, several more. It increases the risk of asthma in children. It increases the risk of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And of course, dental caries or cavities in your teeth, dental erosion, and depression of all things. A high sugar diet increases your risk of depression. So they ended the article saying this: don't have more than 6 teaspoons of sugar in a day. And you think, well, I don't have 6 teaspoons of sugar in a day. Well, it's pretty easy. You check your bread and how much is in it. You check your cereal and how much is in it if you eat dry cereal. If you have 1 drink of soda a day, you've gotten more than 6 teaspoons. You've had about 12 teaspoons of sugar in 1 soda. So that's quite restrictive, and lowering it further than 6 teaspoons a day is even more beneficial. But they said not more than 6 teaspoons of sugar a day and less than 1 sugar-sweetened drink per week. And we all say, well, we don't drink much soda. Well, do you put sugar in your coffee? Ah, that's another sugar-sweetened beverage, isn't it? And how about fruit punch? And how about tea? And they said less than 1 sugar-sweetened drink a week. Now that's significant, but that's because all of those diseases that I mentioned are increase in risk with high sugar intake, which is fascinating. And that's British Journal of Medicine, April 5 this year. So here's another one. This is the one that hasn't been published in the magazine yet, but it has been published online. And I just thought it was interesting what they're recommending to lower your risk of diabetes. You'd expect a magazine called Diabetologia to be about diabetes, right? So here's the recommendations that they make. Number 1, healthy weight maintenance. Okay, so that makes sense because we know that people that are overweight tend to be a higher risk for diabetes. And we can all get on the scale and talk about that, or you can just get out a tape measure. And for men, we want our waist, regardless of our height, to be at 35 or less. And if our waist is over 35, then we're heavier than we need to be. And ladies, it's we persecute you a little more. That waist measurement that we want is about 31 to 32 at most. So if you want to reduce your risk of diabetes, keep your waist down under those numbers. Or if you want a more, if you like weight, we can figure out your ideal body weight as well. But that's number 1 principle. Number 2, they say if you want to reduce your risk of diabetes, you need to have a habitual consumption of whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes. Well, that sounds like what we're talking about here, doesn't it? That's what was in our stew tonight, vegetables and legumes or beans. And if you want to reduce your risk of diabetes, that's the way you want to eat. And number 3, they said you want to avoid the habitual consumption of processed and unprocessed red meat, refined grains, sugar-sweetened beverages, all of those. And what we also know is that fish and poultry increase the risk of diabetes as well. Not as much as red, processed, and unprocessed meat, but it does. So what are they saying? That'll be published in May. They're saying start eating a whole food plant-based diet. And that's what we've been talking about here for quite a few years. And now in the lead journal on diabetes, they're saying the same thing. So you're starting to get a picture of the kind of diet you should eat to avoid chronic disease. And these are articles that have been published in the last 3 weeks. Okay, here's another one. This is from JAMA, March 28. And they looked at plant-based eaters. They didn't look at meat eaters, They just looked at people on a plant-based diet. And they wanted to know, is there a benefit, and if so, what kind of a plant-based diet? And they found that there's a marked benefit if you're on a whole food plant-based diet. Have you heard that term before? Yeah. All-cause mortality drops on a whole food plant-based diet, and risk of the diseases, cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, all go down on a whole food plant-based diet. But if you compare that to what I'd call a vegan junk food diet, you don't get much benefit. If you're eating a lot of refined grains, a lot of sugar, a lot of salt, a lot of snack foods, even if it's plant-based, you don't get a whole lot of benefit. In fact, you'd be better off to be on a healthy, more nearly American diet, or a Mediterranean diet with fish and chicken and more plants and things like that than having a lot of snack food and being on a vegan diet. And that's from JAMA, just at the end of March. Any questions so far? It's kind of the same stuff, right? Yes, question.
I've read a lot of conflicting information. They're talking about diabetes as far as eating fruit. Now, what I see, I think, more right now is that fruit is obviously better than fruit juice.
Okay, so let's talk about fruit and diabetes. It depends on how bad your diabetes is. If you've had diabetes for a long time and you're on insulin because your pancreas isn't working well, you'll need to be more careful than if you've just gotten diabetes and you still have pretty good pancreatic function. Generally speaking, regardless of your status as a diabetic, the northern fruits, not that I'm, feeling particularly persecuting of the tropical fruits, but the northern fruits, they release sugar into your bloodstream more slowly, particularly apples, pears, and berries. In fact, berries, particularly raspberries, are high in pectin, and they will slow sugar absorption into the system and improve your blood sugar. For instance, if you sat down and you had a meal of whole grain cereal, and then you had a meal of whole grain cereal plus raspberries or blackberries, your sugar would actually be lower after the cereal with berries, because they have the pectin in them that slows sugar absorption. Apples are rich in pectin or fiber, and so are pears. And in that natural form, I have no problem with diabetics eating fruit. Some of the other fruits that we consume a lot are bananas. And bananas are very interesting because when they're green, they have a starch in them called a reverse starch that you do not digest in the upper gut, you digest it in the colon. And they do not push the blood sugar of diabetics up when the banana is green. When it's very ripe, that reverse starch has been changed to a simple starch and sugar, and you absorb that and you do get a sugar spike from bananas. The other thing about diabetics is if you go down to the local burger shop and you have the bun, but not the burger, your blood sugar will go up. But if you eat the bun and the burger, it'll go up more. And you say, well, how is that? Because the fat in the burger causes insulin resistance, and the insulin that you do secrete, or if you have to take insulin, you're going to need more to get the carbohydrate absorbed. And that's true anytime you add a saturated fat to the sugar. Interestingly, if you took that bun, the hamburger bun, and you put avocado on it, which is rich in fat, it would do the opposite. It lowers and slows the sugar absorption and lowers your need for insulin because it's a different type of fat, and avocado is very rich in fiber, which the burger isn't, doesn't have fiber in it or very little. So when you're thinking about food, sometimes we separate it out to grains and then fats. No, we don't eat that way. We mix our foods, and when you mix them, it's important to keep that in mind as well. Here's another study. This is from JAMA March 31, and this isn't about fats and sugars, it's about alcohol. For years we've been taught that moderate alcohol intake is good for you, right? You know, if you have a glass of wine, then that'll help preserve your brain, and they talk about the French paradox, how they eat all this fat and have lower risk of heart attack, and you really ought to have a drink or two a day. And so March 31, Journal of American Medical Association came out and they said there is no protective effect with occasional or low volume drinking. So you don't get any benefit from alcohol. And are there risks? Yeah, there are risks. Risk of cancer goes up. For one, your esophageal cancer goes up. One drink a week will measurably increase a woman's risk for breast cancer. So we don't recommend any longer alcohol consumption for health. Many years ago, there was a gentleman that did studies at the medical school that I graduated from, Loma Linda, on alcohol consumption in the brain. And there were many, many specimens, Greg, you may remember this, in the anatomy lab of brains of alcoholics. And his research showed that every single drink kills brain cells. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have any brain cells I want to lose. And so I'm staying away from that stuff. Especially now that we have good information that shows that alcohol increases all-cause mortality. Now, is an occasional drink going to do you in? No. Neither will an occasional cookie do you in. But you want to look at them the same way. They're refined carbohydrates, and it's better to mix them with fiber, and that's where the alcohol came from originally, right? Grain or fruit, like in grapes, and you'd be better off to eat the original food. And that's true. Generally speaking, that's the take-home lesson. Get your food firsthand. That is, it's better to eat the plant than to eat something that ate the plant. And number two, don't change it much from garden to plate. And if you do that, you're going to have the best diet for keeping risk of disease low. Any questions? And I'm going to transition a little bit to some physiology.
Dr. Kyle, you mentioned inflammatory markers going up with certain things. Are there tests that doctors run to measure that inflammation level?
Yes. The most commonly run test for inflammation is the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, or high sensitivity CRP. Now, CRP straight we use when we're looking at rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory disorders, psoriasis, sepsis or infection. We'll often measure a CRP. But if we're looking at risk for coronary disease or other inflammatory disease, lower level of inflammation, you look at the high sensitivity CRP. And that's a good transition to our next little segment here. And that is really when we're talking about diet and chronic disease, we're talking about a diet that minimizes inflammation. That's what we want. You see, everything that we eat that benefits us, gives us energy, has to be what? Burned, right? We talk about burning your calories, right? If you don't burn calories, they don't do you any good. If I'm sitting here or standing here, I'm burning calories. If I'm reading, I'm burning calories. If I'm walking, I'm burning calories. And the reason you eat is so you'll have fuel. The reason you put gas in the car is so you can burn it, right? But burning causes or is inflammation. So we want to eat in such a way so that when we burn our food, it doesn't cause excess inflammation. Inflammation isn't good for us, except if we have an infection, then we need some inflammation to kill the bacteria. That's how the white cells kill it, is with some inflammation. But generally, inflammation isn't good for us, and yet we have to burn things. And I've used this illustration many times. You know you have to heat your house, right? But that requires burning, unless you have solar, but that's the sun burning. If you have wood, you have to burn the wood, right? And if you have gas or propane, you have to burn the propane. And if you have oil, you have an oil furnace, you got to burn that. And yet you know intuitively that burning is dangerous to your house because it'll burn too, right? And so you want to burn that stuff in an enclosed space. We heat with wood primarily, and we have a wood stove. And I want to make sure that that burning takes place in the wood stove. You don't see me get my wood together and my kindling and my paper and light it on the front porch and carry it burning through the house, right? I'm going to heat up the bedroom, so I take my kindling and I got it smoking and burning. And you don't want me to heat the bedroom that way, right? You want it in the stove. Same thing with the oil furnace. You don't take the can of oil and pour it around on the carpet and then start looking for your matches. Same is true with our body. We want that burning to take place in a very confined place, and that place is called the mitochondria. We don't want our food to be burned before we eat it. That's why we say, don't eat char-broiled food. Don't eat burned food. The other thing is, when you're burning, you want to have a lot of antioxidants with the food. What are antioxidants? They're the substances that protect your body from this inflammatory process of keeping you alive, the burning of fuel. And I've used this illustration before, but I think, or this example before, but I think it's really helpful to understand it. If you eat a white potato, or if you eat sugar, you're going to have your inflammatory markers go up after you eat. We can measure that high sensitivity CRP before you eat and after. And if you have a white potato, that high sensitivity CRP will go up after you've eaten the white potato. If you eat a yellow potato, which has antioxidants in it, the CRP will still go up. Inflammatory markers go up, but they go up about half as much as the white potato. If you eat those purple potatoes, which we grew last year in our garden, unfortunately I gave most of them away and now I'm out of them. We ran out last week of those good purple potatoes. But if you have purple potatoes, they're so rich in antioxidants that your inflammatory markers, instead of going up, actually go down after you eat the potato. And that illustrates the point of diet. We want to have food that's very rich in antioxidants. It also illustrates that most of our antioxidants follow color. You want colorful fruits and vegetables. There aren't antioxidants in meat, milk, eggs, cheese, fish, chicken, or turkey, or very low levels, but they're rich in greens, and they're rich in yellows, like sweet potatoes and carrots, and they're rich in fruits that are red and in beets that are red. You want to, as we've said before, eat the rainbow. The more colorful your food, the better. I talked to my wife this morning. We were making my lunch for today, and I said, I'd like some broccoli. She said, we're all out. I said, you mean I'm going to have to go a day without greens? You really need greens every day of some kind: spinach, kale, collards, kohlrabi, purple cabbage. You know, that's really good for you because they're so rich in the antioxidants. And you need some red fruit every day, or beets. The anthocyanins are so good at protecting you from inflammation. And then there's a whole other class of antioxidants that are found in the alliums, and they're not colorful, but they're very potent. And alliums are the onions and the garlics and the shallots, and those are very rich in antioxidants as well. There's another category of antioxidants that they're not really antioxidants, but they're anti-inflammatory, and that is fiber. Fiber is very anti-inflammatory because it keeps your gut microbiome very happy. And when the microbiome is happy, it produces a fatty acid, butyrate, and butyrate reduces inflammation in the gut. The gut has more surface area than your skin does, and if you can reduce inflammation there, total body inflammation will go down. So if you want to have an anti-inflammatory diet that reduces your risk of chronic disease, high fiber, colorful. And try to avoid foods that have had the fiber or the color removed. And that's your best diet for preventing chronic disease. And it's really that simple. Colorful, high fiber diet. And you'll do so much better if you do that. Any questions?
What about eating those fruits that, like bananas or oranges or mangoes, if you aren't diabetic?
No problem. All of those things are fine for you, and they're good for diabetics once they get their weight down to where it belongs. They don't have a problem. You can't get too much fruit. You know, especially if you're having it the way nature provides it. You know, a lot of people love smoothies. And I think smoothies are really good for people that don't have teeth. But if you have teeth, you're better off to have the fruit whole and chew it because you'll absorb the sugar more slowly. Remember, sugar is not a poison. It's what our body runs on. What we have to do is slow the absorption of it so our body can handle it and it doesn't gum up the works. The problem comes is if you dump the sugar into your body faster than it can metabolize it and store it appropriately. If you do that, a lot of it gets changed to fat and stored in the liver, and then you get that steatohepatitis. Your blood sugar goes up, and then you have glycation, which we've talked about. So there's no problem with sugar, you just want to absorb it slowly. Anyone who's a mechanic here worked on engines? I know you have. If I bring my lawnmower to you and I say, you know, it needs a tune-up, you know that if you get the mixture too rich, that is too much fuel, it's going to smoke and run rough, and it's just not going to, and if it gets too lean, we've got an equal problem. You got to get the gas and oxygen mixture just right. And the same is true in the body. You want that fuel supply at just the right, and guess what? When you eat fruit, you get it just perfect. If you grind that fruit up and eat it that way, or if you add sugar, or if you take out the fiber and have it as juice, you absorb it too rapidly. Your sugar goes up as fast with juice as it does with soda. You do get some benefits from the juice that you don't from the soda. You get some antioxidants and other vitamins and minerals. So juice is much better for you than soda, but don't think it's going to help your sugar. It won't. Yeah. You want the whole fruit.
How about apple cider?
Apple cider tastes really good, but you're better off to eat the apples, especially if you're diabetic, Frank. Yeah. Question?
So, we talked about dates and
Dates are really interesting. Dates are very sweet, but they're also high in fiber, and they have a glycemic index of roughly 42. And so I don't have a problem with a diabetic eating dates. And they're a great source of potassium that'll help lower your blood pressure. You can sweeten things with dates. You can go overboard on any food. You can go overboard on water, in fact. It's called drowning. But, but dates are a wonderful food to eat, and I'd encourage you to enjoy them without any problem. Because they're so high fiber, the glycemic index is actually quite low at 42. They're a great food. Any other questions?
sorry, how many dates? I mean, Carol and I love dates.
Well, I want you to eat them. I wouldn't eat a box full in a day, but you know, 3 or 4 or 5 after a meal, I won't fuss at you. Or if you put some in, chop them up. They're good in hot cereal. If you're wanting to improve the glycemic index of your hot cereal, add some seeds. A great thing my wife does is she'll take that date and take the pit out and replace the pit with a walnut, a half a walnut, and then you've got some crunch and it tastes so good, and you've got more fiber there, and you have the good fat and the omega-3 fatty acids, and that's a really good dessert, a date with a nut in it. And that's what my wife did when she dated me. She had a date with a nut. But, and it's been sweet ever since. Oh, well, we got to have some fun, right? Cheryl, come on up. Well, hopefully you've learned a little bit, but it's really all the same, and all these studies were within the last 3 weeks. It's just amazing what we're learning and how science is catching up.
That's awesome. So for those of you who like to eat dates, keep eating them. But gentlemen, take your sweethearts out on dates too.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's
so
just
they can
as
have
important.
a date with a nut, right?
So is Dr. Howe encouraging you to go on a vegan diet?
A whole food
just
plant-based
failed.
diet.
Yeah, a whole food plant-based diet, because
Yeah.
vegan, you can eat Oreo cookies and potato
Garbage.
chips
Yeah.
all day.
I'd like to make a statement.
Okay.
We haven't been here for a couple of years.
And we've
but,
missed you.
5 years before that, we were with you all along the way. We got into everything you've talked about, and I want to thank you very much for getting us on to How Not to Die, because Dr. Greger was a final step in pulling all this stuff together for us.
Yeah, Dr. Greger's a wonderful source.
Thank you so much.
If you haven't logged on to nutritionfacts.org, do. And there is a wealth of material there. I had the opportunity of meeting him when I was at a wellness conference. We were walking on the beach together and had a great talk. And interestingly, his grandmother went to the Pritikin Institute and had her coronary disease reversed. My mother read Pritikin's data and was reversing coronary artery disease in the 1970s. And that's where I got interested in diet. That was before Greger went to medical school and before I did. And you can still do it today.
Any more questions?
Nutritionfacts.org.
Nutritionfacts.org. How Not to Die is a book he's published. How Not to Diet is another one. And he has several cookbooks. And he's a great guy. Although I like my wife's recipes better than his.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back here in May. second Tuesday of the month, and we hope to see you then. Have a good evening. Thanks for coming out. Glad you made it back.